There's nothing like the story of the Dakotas. North and South, two very different states that forged their unique destinies out of one rugged territory. A land of open prairie, ancient badlands, and towering needles of stone. It was in the Dakotas that a legendary Native American woman named Sacagawea first set out to guide explorers across the American West. But it was also here that the U.S. government was found guilty of dishonorable dealings with one of America's great native tribes, and where a horrifying massacre by the U.S. Army, known as Wounded Knee, is still remembered today. Both of these northern states have made their mark on history. One healed the soul of a future American president with its colorful hills. The other immortalized him in stone with a monument to American democracy. But while there may be a lot that these two states share, there's also a lot they don't. In South Dakota, corn is king. But in the north, wheat rules, along with a thriving yellow plant called canola. The Dakotas may be two of the least populated states in the nation, but today, thousands are pouring in. Some come on intimidating steeds and take over entire towns. Others crowd into giant man camps to drill for black gold, leading NASA scientists to wonder about clusters of strange new lights on the prairie. There's no end to what one can discover up here on the northern Great Plains, in the lands known as the Dakotas. In 1883, a train wound its way through these rugged badlands in North Dakota. On board was a 24-year-old state assemblyman from New York who'd come here to hunt bison. His name was Theodore Roosevelt. Out on the prairie, the future president only managed to kill one bison, but ended up falling in love with the beauty of this wild western land. By the time he headed back to New York, he bought a major interest in a local ranch and ordered this small cabin to be built for him to live in when he returned. It was moved here to the town of Medora and restored in 1959. A few months later, the cabin provided a much-needed refuge to Roosevelt after his wife and mother both died on Valentine's Day, 1884. Over the next few years, the restorative power of the region's fertile river valleys and rocky hills drew him back again and again. To give himself more room to roam, he bought an 8-mile stretch along the banks of the Little Missouri River for $400, a place called Elkhorn Ranch. Today, the ranch house is gone. It was during his visits here that he found the solace he needed and developed the conservationist values that shaped the rest of his life. "I would not have been president," he later said, "had it not been for my experience in North Dakota." Roosevelt last visited North Dakota in 1918. But people here have never forgotten the impact their state had on their former president, which is why every summer evening, the hills outside of Medora come alive when the lights go up at the Burning Hills Amphitheater for a high-energy country-style jamboree that celebrates the legacy of President Theodore Roosevelt and his love of these North Dakota hills. Musicals about Roosevelt's time here have been a staple in Medora since 1958. This latest version includes stories of Teddy punching out a drunk in a Dakota bar and going on a bear hunt. Now, anyone can enjoy this landscape, here at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which lies on land where he once herded cattle. Each year, over 600,000 people visit the park to hike and enjoy the same natural beauty that once healed the soul of America's 26th president. Today, the park lies in the southwestern corner of North Dakota. But when Roosevelt stayed here, the states of North Dakota and South Dakota didn't yet exist. Roosevelt first knew this land only as the Dakota Territory. It lay in a region that President Thomas Jefferson had bought from the French in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Back then, no one in Washington even knew what was out here, or in much of the rest of the land beyond it to the west, right up to the Pacific Ocean. So Jefferson sent a corps of explorers under the command of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to travel up the Missouri River to find out. Their mission was to survey and map the vast wilderness along the river's banks and to find a new route to the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't an easy trip from the start. A replica of the keelboat they used is now on display here in the North Dakota capital of Bismarck. When there was wind, they sailed the boat upriver against the Missouri's currents. When the wind died, they had to use paddles and poles to push the boat up the river, or get out and pull it along the shore using ropes. In late August, they arrived in the region that would later become the Dakota Territory. But after 4 more weeks of arduous travel, the harsh Dakota winter brought their progress to a halt. They chose a spot near a string of native villages to wait the winter out. Today, the site of those villages can still be spotted from the air. These round patterns in the earth are actually the foundations of homes once built by members of the Hidatsa, Mandan, and Arikara tribes. On top, they used earth and grass to create snug earth lodges like these that have been reconstructed here at the Knife River Indian Village's National Historic Site. To wait out the coming winter, Lewis and Clark built a temporary home of their own. A triangle-shaped stockade that they named Fort Mandan. Today, this reconstruction shows what it probably looked like. But they found more than shelter while living within the fort's walls. They also found 2 valuable new recruits for their team. A French trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau and his Shoshone wife, Sacagawea. The couple helped Lewis and Clark to communicate with the Indians nearby. First, English was translated into French. Then the French was translated into one of the Indian languages. And then that was all done in reverse. When spring finally arrived and the explorers continued on up the Missouri River, Charbonneau and Sacagawea joined them as translators and guides. Sacagawea, with her baby strapped to her back, would go on to play an essential role in the expedition's success and to win fame as the most admired Native American woman since Pocahontas. On August 14, 1806, the explorers stopped again here at the Mandan villages on their return journey east. Sacagawea's French husband was given land and $500 as payment for his help during the expedition, but Sacagawea received nothing in return. They later moved south to live at this trading post called Fort Manuel in what's now South Dakota. It was here on December 22, 1812, soon after giving birth to her daughter Lisette, that Sacagawea died. She was just 25 years old. Less than a year after her death, William Clark adopted both of Sacagawea's children. In a letter to Charbonneau, he wrote, "Your woman who accompanied you that long, dangerous, and fatiguing route to the Pacific Ocean and back deserved a greater reward for her attention and services on that route than we had in our power to give her." Had Sacagawea lived longer, she would have seen rapid and irreversible change sweep across this region. Lewis and Clark's journals had described the abundant wildlife that they'd seen along the upper Missouri River. And soon, fur trappers and traders were heading west to scour the region's rivers and streams. Their search for furred creatures of all kinds kicked off the transformation of this then wild land into the two Dakotas that we know today. When Lewis and Clark traveled up the Missouri River through what's now South Dakota, they never set eyes on one of America's most impressive landscapes. A place where rugged cliffs rise up through the prairie, like the spiny skeletons of giant ancient creatures. Members of the Sioux were the first to name these formations. They called them Makosika, or land bad. Today, people travel to South Dakota's Badlands from around the world just to see these cliffs eroded out of the soft soil deposits on the prairie floor. Deposits laid down over 28 million years ago that are still being worn away by wind and water at an average rate of an inch a year, making it one of the fastest eroding landscapes on Earth. Flying over this strangely seductive but desolate landscape, it's easy to see why the Sioux called them what they did, and why French fur trappers who arrived here in the early 1800s noted that this part of what's now South Dakota was a bad land to travel through. But that didn't stop them from coming. Many trappers and traders came here hoping to get rich, and some succeeded. One even became the richest man in America. His name was John Jacob Astor. In 1828, he received permission to build a trading post here on the banks of the Missouri River. Astor's American Fur Company was soon open for business here at Fort Union. This is a reconstruction of the original fort, which was built to impress the native people Astor hoped to trade with. Over the next 4 decades, members of the Assiniboine, Crow, Blackfeet, and other tribes came to the post to trade with Astor's men. In a typical year, 25,000 buffalo hides and more than $100,000 in goods passed through the fort, a fortune in those days, and enough to help make John Jacob Astor America's first multimillionaire. Fur trappers and traders were the first real pioneers to establish roots in the Dakotas, and it wasn't long before others followed, curious to find out what the vast open spaces of the northern Great Plains had to offer. And then, on March 21st, 1861, Congress created the vast new Dakota Territory. Initially, it included part of what is now Montana and Wyoming. But in 1863, it was reduced to cover only the area that would go on to become North and South Dakota. The tiny river town of Yankton, which now lies in South Dakota, was chosen to serve as the new territorial capital. The new territorial government's home was modest, a small white clapboard building which has since been reconstructed. It was inside these walls that the Dakota legislature soon voted to found a college for the new territory. That college is now the University of South Dakota, located 25 miles away in the town of Vermilion. Since there was no actual initial funding for the college, it took 20 years before the first classes were held. The oldest building on campus today is Old Main, which was an impressive sight on the prairie in 1893 when it was built. But the university may be most famous today for its former student, NBC News anchor Tom Brokaw. The reporter graduated from USD after dropping out of the University of Iowa. The campus is also home to the National Music Museum. Inside are more than 14,000 musical instruments from all over the world, as well as compositions by a South Dakota farmer named Elmer Lyle Carey, who performed at the inauguration of President William Taft in Washington, D.C. when he was just 17. When locals in Vermilion asked Carey where he learned to play so well, he answered, out in the country, about 7 miles north. That's because Carey's family was part of a great wave of settlers that started arriving just a year after the territory was formed. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act, which opened up the Dakota Territory and other regions of the West for settlement. Homesteaders were offered 160 acres of land for free, as long as they farmed it successfully for 5 years. A flood of settlers took up the offer, and soon, the empty Dakota prairie was dotted with simple farms as more and more homesteaders staked their claims and tried to hold on for the 5 years it took to keep their land. In this nearly treeless region, they built houses with whatever they could find. Many used prairie sod itself for walls and ceilings. But settling on land that was already home to native tribes like the Sioux came at a price. As more and more settlers fanned out across the region, conflicts with the tribes flared across the territory and beyond. In the middle of the 1800s, white settlers were moving on to what's now North and South Dakota and claiming land as their own. So, in the summer of 1857, members of the region's native tribes gathered here on a sacred mountain they called Bear Butte and resolved to resist what they saw as an invasion. Over the next decade, the tribes would fight ferocious battles against the U.S. government, and many would die trying to defend their lands and protect their way of life. One of those conflicts started in 1866 and was known as Red Cloud's War. It's been called one of the most successful wars against the U.S. government ever fought by an Indian nation. After 2 years of fighting, the Sioux Nation won the great victory its people had fought and died for. The U.S. government admitted defeat and promised the Sioux that their lands would be protected from settlement forever. This historic treaty was signed here at Fort Laramie, just across the Dakota border in what's now Wyoming. In 1868, the Laramie Treaty guaranteed the Sioux permanent rights to 25 million acres of Dakota territory west of the Missouri River. The U.S. government promised these Sioux lands would be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians. But just a few years later, gold was discovered in the Black Hills, inside the treaty area. It's estimated that 10,000 illegal settlers arrived here over the next 2 years. They established mining camps like this one, called Deadwood, which became famous for the bars, gambling dens, and bordellos that soon sprang up here to cater to the miners. At first, the U.S. Army tried to stop the trespassers and abide by the treaty. But when Sioux outrage over the violations reignited the Indian Wars, the Army switched to protecting the settlers instead. In 1877, the U.S. government violated the treaty again when it carved the Black Hills out of the Laramie Treaty area. Soon, many in the South were pushing for statehood and to open more of the Sioux lands up for settlement. They saw no reason why the Indians needed so much space of their own. In 1889, many Native Americans were forced off their legally guaranteed land and onto much smaller reservations, like the one here at Pine Ridge. One of those was Chief Sitting Bull, who died here at Pine Ridge in 1890 from gunshot wounds while in federal custody. But there was another dark chapter of the Sioux story that was yet to come. At the time of Sitting Bull's killing, a spiritual movement called the Ghost Dance was sweeping the reservations and stirring a revival of Native culture and pride. The U.S. government feared these dances would inspire a new wave of Indian wars. So when word spread that a ghost dance was going to take place here at the Pine Ridge Reservation, the U.S. Army was sent in to stop it. On December 29, 1890, by a creek known as Wounded Knee, the Sioux chief Spotted Elk and his people surrendered peacefully to the U.S. Army. But when the troops moved in to disarm the Indians, a shot was fired, and then hundreds more. By the time the killing had ended, Spotted Elk and up to 300 Sioux had been massacred. Today, they rest together in a mass grave here at the Wounded Knee site, including the women and children who made up at least half of those killed, innocent victims of the last military action in America's epic Indian Wars. It took almost a century for the Sioux Nation to get its day in court. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Black Hills and the rest of the Sioux land defined in the Laramie Treaty had indeed been stolen by the U.S. government in what the court called a ripe and rank case of dishonorable dealing. The government was ordered to pay the Sioux more than $100 million to make up for the loss of the lands, but the Sioux voted to turn the money down. As of 2014, those funds still lay in a government coffer, worth, thanks to interest, almost $1 billion. The tribe still claims that no amount of money would be able to compensate them for the loss of their sacred Black Hills and the rest of their homelands. One way that more and more settlers were arriving in the Dakota Territory in the late 19th century was by train. The railroad was the era's most transformative technology. Wherever trains went, change came along for the ride. The Dakota Territory was no exception. Trains first reached what's now North Dakota in 1872, when a locomotive made its way into the town of Fargo. The owners of the Northern Pacific Railroad had founded the town just the year before, on a spot they deemed best for a river crossing. Rail traffic quickly transformed this patch of wilderness into a bustling town that's now North Dakota's biggest city. By the time this railroad station opened in 1920, the trains were bringing thousands of Norwegian immigrants to town. They created a unique Scandinavian-American culture here, in North Dakota and across the northern Great Plains. A culture that was brought to life in the Coen brothers movie Fargo, starring Frances McDormand, and winner of 2 Academy Awards. Despite being named for this North Dakota city, most of the film actually takes place just over the border in Minnesota. After trains rolled into Fargo, the railroad men pushed their tracks west across North Dakota, while creating some impressive engineering wonders to overcome the obstacles along the way. Obstacles like this gorge known as Gasman Coulee. Keeping the trains above the flood-prone gorge required building a bridge 1,792 feet long and 117 feet tall at its highest point. This steel version was built in 1899, replacing an 1887 wooden trestle lost to a tornado. Up to 40 freight trains still use it every day. Some say when one crosses over, you can hear the rumble from 1/4 mile away. In 1872, the Northern Pacific Railroad reached the Missouri River at a spot known as Missouri Crossing. The railroad men renamed the tiny town Bismarck after German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, hoping to attract German investors in their railway. Trains arriving here brought in prospectors heading to gold mines in the Black Hills. And in 1883, the growing town was made the territorial capital, to the dismay of many in Yankton. But plans for statehood were already underway. And on November 2nd, 1889, the Dakota Territory was finally divided into 2 separate states, when President Benjamin Harrison signed legislation admitting both North Dakota and South Dakota into the Union. It said he shuffled the papers so no one would ever know which state was admitted first. Initially, South Dakotans couldn't decide on a location for their new capital. After 14 years of debate and 3 statewide votes, the central railroad town of Pierre finally came out on top, as some had long expected. The city fathers urged the state to hurry up and build a capitol building, one so grand, no one could ever again think of moving the government away. Construction of the capitol began the very next year and was completed by 1910. The total cost of the building was less than $1 million. But South Dakota got a lot of bang for its buck. A copper-covered dome, massive rotunda, Corinthian columns, and rusticated granite and Bedford limestone walls. With its completion, Pierre's place as South Dakota's capital would never be challenged again. But across the border, legislators in the new North Dakota capital of Bismarck decided to do something completely different. Build a state capital that looked like it belonged in modern America and not in ancient Rome. The result was this Art Deco tower, designed by architects Hullibird and Root, that might have looked more at home in New York City's Rockefeller Center than here on the Great Plains, where at 242 feet, it's still the tallest building in the state. In the 19th century, the Dakota Territory was invaded by settlers and gold miners, searching for treasure on land that wasn't theirs. But today, every August, another thundering horde descends on this part of South Dakota to take over a little town during one of the biggest biker rallies in the world. Every July, more than 500,000 bikers from across North America roar into South Dakota. They arrive on intimidating steeds and lay claim to the streets, sidewalks, and bars of the little South Dakota town of Sturgis. This annual invasion started back in 1938 when a local mechanic named Pappy Hoyle and his wife Pearl formed the Jack Pine Gypsies Motorcycle Club and launched a motorcycle race. It quickly grew. Racing is still part of the scene today, but most of the action has shifted to Sturgis's Main Street and slowed down quite a bit because it's hard to show off a Harley if you're going too fast. Sturgis's normal population is about 6,700, and so having 500,000 bikers ride into town means that getting a hotel room here during the rally is pretty much impossible. Back in Pearl Hoyle's day, bikers used to camp out in her living room or park their RVs in her yard. Today, most stay in huge campground playgrounds outside town that offer comforts Pearl and her guests never dreamed of, like hundreds of RV hookups and their own stages and comedy clubs. Here at the Broken Spoke Saloon Campground, bikers can even ride right in the front door to grab a martini, buy some lingerie, or get a tattoo. Or they can head over to take a dip in what's billed as the largest biker swimming pool in the world. During the rally, these adult playgrounds are Sturgis's party central. But some of the more adventurous bikers head out for a chance to wind through one of the great landscapes of the American West, the granite spires of South Dakota's Black Hills. But in the early 20th century, there were very few good roads, which meant it was hard to get here at all. That's why South Dakota State historian Dwayne Robinson wanted to build a monument that could lure tourists to this wondrous landscape. When he saw this group of now famous granite spires, known as the Needles, he imagined using them to carve giant portraits of heroes of the American West. Heroes like Lewis and Clark, Buffalo Bill Cody, and the great Sioux chief Red Cloud, who had fought and died to keep the Black Hills off limits to miners, settlers, and even the kind of tourists Robinson hoped to attract. But when Danish-American sculptor Gutzon Borglum saw the Needles, he wasn't convinced they would be suitable for large-scale carvings and told Robinson he feared they would end up looking like misplaced totem poles. But he soon found another location just a few miles away that he thought would be perfect. A giant wall of solid granite, big enough for multiple carved portraits, each up to 6 stories tall. There was, he declared, no piece of granite comparable to it in the United States. He also thought that a national tribute to U.S. presidents would be more appealing than heroes of the West. "I want to create a monument so inspiring that people from all over America will be drawn to come and look and go home better citizens," he said. Soon, President Calvin Coolidge and others were helping secure federal funding. It took more than 14 years for Borglum and 400 workers to blast and chisel this world-famous quartet of former presidents. George Washington came first, his familiar profile emerging from the mountain in less than 3 years, in time for an especially patriotic dedication on July 4th, 1930. Thomas Jefferson followed in a spot to Washington's right, but unstable stone there forced Borglum to dynamite his original Jefferson and move the third president to Washington's left. Jefferson's revised image received its dedication in 1936. Lincoln came next, in a spot originally intended for a giant tablet inscribed with an inspirational text. Then, all hands turned to adding Teddy Roosevelt to the group. After Borglum died, his son Lincoln oversaw the carving of the final details. On October 31st, 1941, just 14 years after work began, the monument was declared complete. Today, evidence of the enormous effort it took to do the job can still be seen here. When all was said and done, 800 million pounds of rock had been removed, from the fine chisel marks on the president's faces to the orderly lines of scars left on the surrounding stone by dynamite and drills, to the enormous piles of rubble below. In 1959, the monument provided the setting for two of Hollywood's most infamous moments in Alfred Hitchcock's classic thriller, North by Northwest. In one key scene, Hitch has icy blonde Eva Marie Saint pretend to shoot leading man Cary Grant in the visitor center. Then, he sends Grant, Saint, and villain Martin Landau on a deadly chase across the president's faces. Hitchcock was planning to shoot this second scene on the monument itself, but a journalist spilled news of the planned chase, and the National Park Service shut Hitchcock down, which is why the final scene was filmed on a Hollywood soundstage instead. But the Black Hills are also home to a Sioux monument as well. It was dreamed up by a group of Native Americans led by Henry Standing Bear, a chief of the Lakota Sioux tribe. He recruited Polish-American sculptor Korczak Julkowski, who finally started work on June 3, 1948. Julkowski chose to depict Crazy Horse on horseback, pointing to the horizon, but was only able to complete the head before he died in 1982, after working on the giant sculpture for almost half his life for free. The sculptor turned down government funding for the project because of its violation of the Laramie Treaty. But admission fees and donations have enabled Julkowski's family to continue his work. More than 1 million people visit this site each year to see this larger-than-life portrait of America's great Indian chief, which is exactly what Henry Standing Bear was hoping for when he dreamt up this tribute in stone. "My fellow chiefs and I would like the white man to know," he once said, "that the red man has great heroes also." The Black Hills that Crazy Horse once knew have changed in ways that can never be reversed. And there's no better example of that change than this, the largest and deepest gold mine in the United States. It lies just 50 miles from Mount Rushmore and is known as Homestake Mine. This open pit is so deep and so wide, it looks like it was created by a giant Babylonian ziggurat that's been plunged upside down into the earth and then pulled back out. To get down to its base, 8,000 feet below, trucks once followed a road that spiraled down along the side of the mine itself. A group of California prospectors began digging on a 10-acre claim here in 1877, the year the U.S. government took the Black Hills back from the Sioux. Before it closed in 2002, the Homestake had yielded 39 million ounces of gold, making it the most successful gold mine in the U.S. But while gold may have triggered a mad rush into what's now South Dakota back in the 1800s, these days, North Dakota is now experiencing a boom of its own. Thousands are flooding into the state to help tap treasure deep underground. And they're lighting up the prairie like never before. In 2012, NASA scientists began looking at new satellite images of North America taken at night. They knew the familiar bright lights of Atlanta, New York City, Chicago, and Minneapolis. But as their eyes moved west, they discovered a large cluster of light on the Great Plains, in a place where they knew there was almost nothing but farmland and prairie. The fact was, these weren't actually the lights of any one city or town. They were lights from housing and drilling equipment, and of gas flares from hundreds of new oil wells that dot North Dakota today. In 2013, the U.S. produced more oil domestically than it imported for the first time in nearly 2 decades. And the heart of America's 21st century oil boom happens to be right here in North Dakota. That's because the state sits right on top of one of the largest deposits of oil in the United States. It's known as the Bakken Shale Formation, a vast underground pool of oil that stretches across much of western North Dakota and up into Canada. The epicenter of the boom is the town of Williston. South Dakota may have had its own gold rush towns back in the 1800s, but now it's North Dakota's turn. Williston is a true 21st century boomtown. Between 2000 and 2013, the town's population more than doubled, as oil production in the state went up more than 600%. Most of the newcomers are men who heard about the money to be made here, dropped everything, and rushed out to North Dakota to grab their share. Their mass arrival caused a housing crunch so tight that some apartments in Williston rent for as much as they would in New York City, leaving plenty of newcomers sleeping in their trucks. The solution? Prefab housing complexes and trailer parks that are known as man camps. Some of these complexes house up to 8 men in a single trailer. And rules at some can be strict. No drugs, alcohol, visitors, or guns allowed. But many workers here don't have much free time anyway to do anything but sleep. They often work 80-hour weeks to earn their lucrative salaries of over $90,000 a year. But it's not just the flood of workers that's straining the region's infrastructure. The flood of oil is too. The boom is so recent, there aren't enough pipelines yet to get the oil from the wells to the refineries. Trucks do the job instead. A single well can require 2,000 trips in its first year of operation alone, and thousands more after that. Which is why being a truck driver in the Bakken field is one of the easiest jobs to get. With their tanks full of crude oil, many of these drivers head here, to the Bakken Oil Express rail hub near Dickinson. They drive right into its 6-bay truck center and storage facility, which can fill the tanker cars of an entire mile-long train to the gills with crude in just 12 hours. It's an amazing sight from the air. Giant loops of rail track feeding cars one after another into a loading shed so they can be filled with freshly pumped crude oil from the Bakken field. In 2013, this one facility could ship 200,000 barrels of oil a day out of North Dakota, worth roughly $20 million. And for every full oil train that leaves the state, another empty one rolls in, ready to be loaded. But the Bakken oil boom wouldn't have happened if not for a new and often controversial extraction technique. Ever since the 1950s, scientists here knew that the Bakken Formation held billions of barrels of oil, but they didn't know how to get to it. That's because it was locked in layers of rock, deep underground. Once, a prehistoric sea covered this region. When it dried up 60 million years ago, it left behind carbon-rich layers of dead sea creatures in the sediment on its floor. Then, over time, heat and pressure from geological forces trapped that carbon between layers of shale, where it still is today. That's why oil companies use fracking technology to force the oil out of the shale. First, geologists identify a good place to drill. Then, workers clear a fracking pad and set up a rig. Next, they drill pipes 2 or more miles into the ground, right through the shale itself. Finally, they pump water, sand, and chemicals down into the pipes under extremely high pressure, which actually fractures the shale and releases the oil. The oil flows freely up the pipes, but along with it comes natural gas. Without enough pipelines to carry that gas to refineries, the oil companies burn off about 30% of the gas instead. Many landowners claim the fracking chemicals and the gas flares are polluting their air and water. Landowners like Brenda and Richard Jorgensen, who own this farm east of Williston. Like many farmers here, the Jorgensens mainly own the surface rights, but not the mineral rights to their farm, which is why an oil company was allowed to build this giant fracking pad just 700 feet from their house on a neighbor's land. One of 25 such pads within a 2-mile radius. The family says their air has been polluted by chemicals used at the well and with toxic fumes from the flares. When the gas flares blow out, the Jorgensens have smelled what they believe is hydrogen sulfide gas that is a known toxin produced by fracking sites. The controversies over this new form of oil extraction are likely to continue for years to come. Meanwhile, those who don't live in oil country have other things to think about. And sometimes, the Dakota's empty prairies can have an unusual effect on people. People like Wayne Porter. In 1983, Porter decided to quit grazing sheep in this field along Interstate 90 outside the South Dakota town of Montrose and start filling it up with giant sculptures instead. Landlocked goldfish leaping through the grass, a giant butterfly perched on a towering finger, and more, all made by Porter himself. When he's done, he leaves them out here for passing motorists to enjoy. His masterpiece so far is this 25-ton, 60-foot-tall metal bust of a bull that took him 3 years to complete. Porter brags it's as big as Mount Rushmore's presidential portraits. Proof that thinking big comes natural in the Dakotas. And the biggest thinkers in both North and South Dakota might just be farmers. That's because they're responsible for more than 80 million acres of farmland in both states. Here in South Dakota, corn is king. Farmers here grow more than 600 million bushels of this one crop every year. And corn is much more than just a commodity here. It's a symbol of a way of life that's passed down through generations and celebrated every year in the South Dakota farming town of Mitchell at the Corn Palace. It started in 1892 as a place for farmers to sell their produce and to promote the state's favorite crop. The elaborate murals on its walls are made from, not surprisingly, corn husks and are recreated fresh every year. But you won't find any Corn Palace in North Dakota. That's because up here, wheat rules. North Dakota grows more wheat than almost any other state, along with more barley, flaxseed, and one of the most colorful crops there is, canola. Soar over northern North Dakota on any day in July, and oceans of canola stretch to the horizon. These yellow plants are actually a kind of rapeseed, which was developed over the border in Canada at the University of Manitoba. Canola is actually short for Canada Ola, or oil. And it thrives here in North Dakota, which alone produces almost 90% of all canola grown in the U.S. Once it's pressed into oil, it's used for cooking, livestock feed, and biodiesel. It's considered to be a healthy oil since it's low in saturated fats. Finding ways to keep these fields of gold thriving and maximizing production of canola and other crops for North Dakota farmers is the job of students and faculty alike at North Dakota State University in Fargo. It was founded as an agricultural college in 1890, the year after North Dakota became a state. Many know NDSU for its Fargo Dome, the home of the university's Bison football team, which has one of the best records in Division I football. It's known to be one of the loudest indoor arenas in the nation, thanks to its dome, which is said to amplify crowd noise, earning it the nickname, the Thunderdome. But the real heart of this campus lies here, in these greenhouses and fields, where NDSU researchers study everything from how deep in the ground seeds should be planted, to the best ways to store harvested crops, to the impacts of flooding and drought. Not to mention, the best ways to heat your barn and keep your cows warm when winter rolls around. Modern science that helps farmers across the Dakotas and the nation thrive. But with so much farmland to care for in North and South Dakota, it's not surprising that many farmers also get help from the sky. Every summer, crop dusters, like this one, can be seen buzzing fields across North and South Dakota, spraying pesticide and other ag chemicals to help farmers ward off bugs and other threats. These days, ag pilots use sophisticated tools to get the job done, like GPS technology that helps them make sure they don't miss any part of the field, or spray a neighbor's crops by mistake, which can lead to harsh words and sometimes even nasty lawsuits. Ag pilots fly so low, they rarely need to be in touch with any control tower. And most do it because they simply love to fly. And who can blame them? There's nothing like soaring over the great landscapes of North and South Dakota and discovering the beauty, stunning sights, and rich history of these two Great Plains states, all from the air.